Okay, can you hear me, Matteo?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Uh, let's see if we see Matteo, Maria, and Alessio. I don't
Hey guys.
see.
Hello.
Okay, I don't see
Hi there.
Alessio, but I think that Alessio, are you there?
Yeah, I'm in here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear but not see you, as you prefer.
You should be able to see me. I can see myself. There you
Oh,
go.
okay, great, great.
Hey guys.
Hi. So basically, today we will talk about the reframing DeFi. So this panel, we will talk about the DAO governance challenges and the risk diversification mostly. And at the end, we will get you some insight about the future trends in the decentralized finance ecosystem. Here with me, we have Maria Magenes, that we already know from MakerDAO. He's the community manager for Europe.
Hello.
And we have also Matteo Pandolfi, one of the founder of Idle Finance, a very useful platform for leveraging all the lending platforms that are currently in the decentralized finance. And Alessio Delmonti, that basically we know for DexWallet and for a lot of other initiatives like DDI. And the last one is PyDAO, that is very, very trending now.
Hey guys. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so as mentioned before, the first topic is the DAO governance. So during the last year, a lot of DAO popped up with different goals, but we know that the most important one, because of the related stable coin, is MakerDAO. So my first question for Maria is, thanks to your experience, what's your feedback about the governance and the community adoption of Maker and MakerDAO?
So yeah. So just a quick recap, if I am allowed to explain how the DAO MakerDAO works. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So if somebody doesn't know, so basically we have the governance in MakerDAO is composed by MKR holders, and the MKR holders are allowed to vote on chain in the governance portal. And there are two type of vote. The first one is the executive vote for hard changes, like for example the introduction of new stable coins or the emergency shutdown. And the governance polls, which are for soft changes, for example, the change in stability fees or the SR rate, etc. So, as I said, everyone who holds MKR can participate to the vote on chain. We have also some off-chain places where people, other stakeholders, can express their preferences, such as the forum, the chat, and the governance and risk calls, which take place every week Thursday. At 6 CET time. If you want to participate, just to update yourself, you're welcome. And basically, the foundation and the community put in place several resources and useful tools to allow the governance and the community to stay always updated and having continuous conversation and meaningful conversation, which are the chat, the forum, and these calls, these weekly calls. It's not easy to having an efficient DAO and a fully engaged community if you don't push the education, and if you don't have accessible tools such as the one that I just mentioned, and more. For example, we have the voter onboarding guide, the voting tutorials to explain people how they can vote. But also we are engaging now in some other actions to go through our fully decentralization process, which are the introduction of, for example, the vote delegates, the maker improvement proposals, and the elected paid contributors. So these are all of these are actions and tools that we put in place to improve our governance efficiency, basically.
Okay.
And make the DAO more easy to understand for people, and more accessible as well.
Yeah, so basically, if I understood correctly, running a DAO is not easy as it may seem. I mean, that you can create a DAO very easily, but to run it, you have
exactly
several components.
Exactly. So the problem is that running a DAO is not the correct. Nobody should run a DAO. You know, the DAO should function itself, but it's not easy to put. I mean, there should be something that bring the DAO to function correctly itself in an efficient way, and this is what we are trying to achieve now after the MCD launch, basically.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting because you already mentioned that you have several degrees for attracting people for running a DAO. I mean, you start with informal conversation on chat, and then maybe formalize. We saw a lot of this kind of discussion, for example, the introduction of USDC collateral or the stability changes in a forum. And then only at the end, you go to the platform where you can express your, your vote against the change.
Exactly.
And this is very, very. So as you mentioned, there is friction in all of this process. It's not easy as it seems. So you are going to introduce. To improve the workforce on the educational point of view, I mean that you have to train people to understand which components and so on. But at the same time, you just said that you are going to introduce some sort of vote delegations. So basically, the owners of Maker token can delegate other parties that are more involved in this sense.
Exactly. Basically, the vote delegates are. I think one of the main action the main tool we are introducing to make also smaller MKR holders able to make their voice heard. Because as we know, as I didn't tell it before, but of course the vote is weighted. So as much MKR you have, the more MKR you have,
more
the more exactly. So these delegates are people who state their position of chain, basically, and all the MKR holders that are aligned with this position, with this idea, can delegate their vote without losing their token. They still have MKR. And they put together their voices, and this delegate will vote on their behalf, basically.
Okay, great. I think that the delegate concept is popping up in a lot of platforms, and we know about some rumor that Maker Foundation is going to dissolve. What does it mean for DAI holders and overall for the DeFi community?
So this is not a rumor, because I mean, Maker Foundation was firstly founded with the purpose of being
Dissolved.
exactly. So the gradual decentralization was part of the plan. And was always a core principle of Maker. Now, as I said, after the MCD launch, which took a lot of our work, the foundation is now concentrated on this Maker DAO sustainability project.
Yeah.
Exactly. The initiative that, as I already mentioned, has three core principles that are the Maker improvement proposals framework, which is the process to standardize how change is made, how changes are made to the protocol and governance. And make it very clear to the community, and then the elected pay contributors, that will be some external workforce and decentralized workforce of the DAO. So people who maybe now are part of the foundation or not, people elected by the governance, who will take care of particular topics like HR, marketing, smart contracts,
whatever it needs for Maker to work.
Exactly. But they will not be employed by the foundation, but they will be elected by the DAO. And as we already mentioned, the vote delegates that will allow everyone to vote properly, and will make the vote more accessible. So basically, we started this process just to give some dates. In December 2019. When the foundation transferred the Maker and DAI trademarks portfolios to the newly formed DAI Foundation, which is a no-profit. Then, just prior to this, the control of the MKR token and the smart contracts was transferred to the governance community. And the most recent and significant step was to transfer the complete control of the MKR token from the foundation to the community. So this process of, the dissolving of the foundation will not be like a 2 weeks process. It will be, it will last years, maybe 1 year and a half, 2 years. But starting now, allow to reach what I mentioned before, which is the efficiency of the DAO.
Perfect.
Because the preparation is really important, and in particular in Maker, which is composed by a lot of stakeholders.
It's not easy as it means.
Exactly.
That's it. Okay, thank you very much, Maya. I would like to ask to Matteo now. We know that Eidoo, for example, apply updates to the platform and all of the changes in a very safe way, but it doesn't have in this moment any sort of DAO. Are you considering this model for managing your platform in the near or mid-term future?
Yeah, well, yeah, in Eidoo, we are actually considering a DAOification process of the protocol. And it's something that actually we have been considering about since the beginning of Eidoo. We want to progressively hand control to our users, but right now we want to ensure that we are building something that add value and can adapt to different market phases before making some step forward to a DAO model. So in my view, decentralization add value to something, but that something should be ready for different scenarios and market changes, in my opinion. Well, for the model that we have in mind, I mean, it's basically a protocol DAO where members are able to promptly pose specific function of the protocol, deposits or the rebalance for like emergency situation, but only token holders are able to impose it. So in this way, token holders have the ability to ultimately override the protocol decisions and agree with that changes that have been made. I mean, this decentralization is a non-trivial problem.
Yeah.
And if you force every update into a governance process, even if like in a positive way, of course, but you're gonna slow everything down massively. And that is into our path, but we are prioritizing other aspects and improvements for our protocol before reaching it.
Thank you very much. I think that the protocol DAO approach is very good. I mean, the way that some party can basically stop some function, but ultimately at the end the user can override. This is a very powerful concept
Exactly.
that I see that I know that probably in the next release of Synthetics, for example, just to name another platform,
True.
is very
Yeah.
famous, is going to do. This is very, very interesting. And what about you, Alessio? Now we know you as the PyDAO founders with your team. The platform launched a few weeks ago with BTC plus plus, and basically PyDAO is a DAO. So if you can give just a high level overview of how works the DAO part, and especially if you can give us a feedback of how do you leverage the DAO to help the user about the IMBTC exploits.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, PyDAO launched previous this month. So like the 3rd of this month, we launched BTC++. For the guys who don't know what PyDAO is, it's pretty much an asset allocation DAO. And the main goal of the organization is to create a decentralized social layer, pretty much for the decision making of tokenized portfolio that we call pies. And as you mentioned, the first pie has been BTC++, which went pretty well so far. We've been seeing around 140K in liquidity in the first, in less than a month, which is good. And I totally agree with some of the statement which has been said by Maria and Matteo before about the challenges of decentralization. We have been seeing through the recent IMBTC events. I don't define that as an actual IMBTC exploit, since IMBTC was not hacked by definition, to be fair. But yeah, what happened was more the interaction between some other protocols. But regarding us, we actually been extremely proactive on the kind of action that we have been putting together. BTC++, I want to say, was not affected as our pools are ERC-777 compatible. But we have been observing the situation and took immediate action as we had a number of safeguards activated in place through the smart contract. So the first things that we have been doing is actually to post trading. Like one of the approach of PyDAO and part of its social contract is basically that the DAO can monitor for funky stuff happening with the underlying assets and eventually post trading if we feel there is a risk of default or some emergency situation happening. So that means that, for instance, stolen funds could not be used or swapped within BTC++. The second security measure which was in place was a cap, which has been set to 0. And the reason is, even if some stolen IMBTC were in control of the hacker, they could not be added to the pool. So basically, BTC++ holder can rest assured no stolen IMBTC has been used into the pool. And I think this has been like a good example of why we need social layer on top of DeFi protocols in order to take action for these kind of things. In order to, like, I think this will happen probably like in 10 hours or so, maybe less, as we triggered an on-chain vote after an investigation, technical investigation and working with different stakeholders into the DeFi community to understand if it's now safe to re-enable trading. So I think the on-chain vote will actually occur in a few hours, and then trading should be enabled again. One thing which I think is important also to highlight is that some of these security features are important because even when IM-BTC transfer were frozen for a little bit, BTC++ transfers were not. So this means that one or even multiple assets within a BTC++ pool can be frozen at the same time, while BTC++ can stay liquid. So somewhat protecting like the assets of these people.
Clear. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting overview of how DAO could be leveraged to protect the DeFi platform, as you mentioned, like a social contract. And I think that now we can pass to the second topic of this panel, that is the risk diversification. And I think that we don't have, the best person to talk about is Matteo, because Idle Finance has something ready to be launched shortly. So the first question that I would like to ask to Matteo is to briefly explain how Idle works and what were the challenges that the team faced during this period. We have a lot of them related to, for example, the Fulcrum issues, the Black Thursday, or, for example, the compound die shortage of a few days ago.
Yeah, sure. So about Idle, we are basically aggregating different lending protocol and automatically optimizing interest rate returns across different lending protocol. So as you said, we have a new product that is going to be released in May, which is slightly different, but takes the same logic as the current allocation strategy that we have. So the current allocation strategy that we have been called both yield bouncer, yield optimizer, best rate allocation strategy. Is the final aim of that allocation strategy is to optimize the interest rate return. With this new allocation strategy, we want to minimize the risk across the various lending protocols. So about the question on the emergency situation, all the challenges that we faced in the last few months. For example, for the Fulcrum exploit, well, I want to highlight that the DAI and USDC pools during that exploit were not affected by the exploit itself, but they were affected by a panic bank run. Mm-hmm. So for some moments, for some days, those pools were illiquid because of a bank run, and also because the trading on BZX protocol was paused. So borrowers were not able to actually close their position and let the liquidity flows in. So in order to do that, during that situation, we actually allowed our users to redeem the underlying tokens, so to actually allow them to then redeem them into Fulcrum. And when the trading was restored a couple days after the exploit, we saw that actually the liquidity was flowing, and we were able to rebalance the funds into compound during that specific moment. For what concern other emergency situation in the last months, there was the Black Thursday, which I think that it affected all the DeFi ecosystem, and even though the interest rates in the lending platforms were pretty high during that period, we got hear into community calls from MakerDAO for all days. So we were kind of trying to be completely aware of what was happening with MakerDAO. And for the compound shortage a few days ago, well, so there's a really interesting article analysis made by Alessio, which is an analytic platform. And so it's about near illiquidity, actual illiquidity, and bank run stages that can happen on lending protocol. And this is something that is already happening in the past. And it's a systemic event that depends from multiple variables. But that's exactly what we want to address with our risk-adjusted allocation strategy. Yeah. So talking about that, as I said before, Eidoo automatically rebalance funds across lending protocols. We can do that in terms of return, and we want to do that in terms of risk. So with this new allocation strategy, which is in partnership with DeFi Score, which is a product that is assessing risk, across lending protocols, we will have an automated strategy that rebalance funds to get the lowest risk score possible. So talking about how the risk is assessed on all the lending protocols, there are three main metrics that are used. The first one is the smart contract risk, aka code security, let's call it. So the time on mainnet, the critical vulnerabilities that have happened into the different lending protocols. How many public audits there are in the protocols? How recent are the audits, and if there is a bounty program for the protocols. This is the first metric. The second metric is the financial risk. So there are two main data that are analyzed for this risk, which one is the collateral. So for the collateral, they use two different pieces of data that are both derivable from on-chain data. The first one is the utilization rate, and the second one is the risk of portfolio assets. There are two ways to evaluate the risk of a portfolio asset. One is a most common model used in finance is the VAR, the value at risk model. But there are multiple different variations of the VAR, of course. And in DeFi Score, currently they are using the C-VAR, so the conditional value at risk, also known as expected shortfall. And they are using the C-VAR over the VAR because it better captures the probability of drawdowns of more extreme scenarios like black swans. And talking about the financial risk, a second metric is the liquidity. So basically the liquidity level on each lending protocol. And the third and last metric, key metric that is used to assess the risk is the centralization and intermediary risk on the lending protocol. So protocol administration, if the protocol has admin keys without a time lock, or admin keys with a time lock, or with a time lock and a multi-sig, or there are no admin keys at all. And also they look at the oracles. So if the protocol use centralized self-operated oracles, or a mix between the centralized and centralized oracles, or only the centralized oracles.
Mm-hmm.
So using all of those metrics, they are able to produce a score, a risk score, and we are using that risk score, which can vary, can change every block potentially, because the liquidity can flow from one protocol to another every block. So we are using that score to produce an allocation that has the lowest risk score possible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the risk-adjusted allocation strategy that we are going to release in May, with a major also update on our UI and UX. And other than that, about the risk topic, we are working with different security audits firms to have a clear procedure, either for showing to our users the due diligence that we make when we choose to implement a protocol into Eidoo, and also to educate user on the action that we can take during an emergency situation. So an emergency situation procedure. During an emergency situation procedure, those are the action that we can take. Those are the communication that we will going to give to our users, where users can actually contact us, and how what can they do during those periods. So to have a completely clear and transparent procedure for both the due diligence and the emergency situation management. Yeah, that's basically all for the risk-adjusted allocation strategy, and how we are going to face risk across lending protocols. We are partnering, as I said, with DeFi Score And
Clear. So
the memory is the correct. Yeah. Okay.
So we can stay longer. I want to highlight this fact. So from an high level perspective for the end user, um, using a product like Idle Finance, which implement this kind of risk assessed allocation, is a value added, because if I put my money in a single lending platform, if something happened to that lending platform, I'm at risk. I may be able not to get back my money immediately because there is a shortage of liquidity. So going for Idle Finance, what I get is not only maximizing the yield, but also mitigating all these kind of issues that could happen. So basically, the value added of Idle is to handle all this stuff on chain or off chain with this kind of platform. Yes, this is, I think, for an end user that could be blocked. We know that, for example, in DeFi Italy, a lot of users, for example, for Compound was blocked that day. Having Idle can prevent this kind of
specifically for the risk adjusted allocation. Yeah, that would be something that will lower that kind of risk.
Okay, regarding the a final question is, are you going to add any other new? I mean, we don't have so many lending platforms, but are you going to add some new one? And what was the process for adding a new one? I mean, from a very eagle-eye perspective. I mean, you asked for the community. You just see that there was a plenty of liquidity. So how do decided to add a new lending platform?
That's a great question. And so for how we decide to add a new platform, well, we have different metrics, of course, to evaluate if, when, and if to add a protocol, a new lending protocol into Eidoo. There is, on one side, there is the user based decision. So if actually users are asking for that, and we had some protocols that have been asked for by our users. And on the other side, we look at the metrics that I said before. We look at the liquidity. We establish a direct communication channel with the teams of the protocols. So we want to be able to actually promptly communicate with the team of the protocols in order to have a complete communication with them. And for adding a new protocols, well, yeah, we're going to have two well-known implementation in Eidoo for our next May release. One is the YDX and the other is the DSR. The former was super requested by our users, and well, will allow to enlarge our interest rate spectrum. And the DSR, that even though it's 0% now, but it's still under, like, there is polls for that, community polls for that, but it has intrinsically less risk compared to other lending protocols. And it will be a great component for our risk-adjusted allocation strategy.
Clear. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matteo. And what about Maker, Maria? We know that now, probably 1 month ago, community decided to add USDC as collateral. There are some new proposal for adding new collateral. Can you anticipate to add something?
So yes, USDC was added in a, let's say, a critical moment to add the liquidity, to foster liquidity to the system. But one of the main lessons learned, I think, we achieved after this event, the last month market crash event, is that having a wide portfolio of collateral is crucial. to diversify and to have, to make the system more robust. So it's obviously one of the communities and governance priorities to add new collaterals. If you go on the forums, there is a very wide thread about with a lot of proposals regarding the addition of new collaterals. The proposals vary from other stable coins like security tokens, real world assets tokenized, ERC20, of course, EURs, for example. We have a name like Uniswap, liquidity token, Chainlink, so far and so forth. So the collaterals will be added, of course, with a timeline. If I can tell you some dates, some timeline anticipation. So we will start the onboarding with the first new collateral in the early May. Then some other will be onboarded probably at the end of the month of May. And then there will be a new wave 3 months after this. I can tell which collaterals are being added, also because the voting are still ongoing, and there will be the collaterals will be always voted by the community and not decided by the foundation. But yes, that's the idea. Absolutely. So yeah.
Clear. Yeah. So we have to stay tuned on MakerDAO chat and forums to understand what will be the first ones.
Exactly. Not the chat is a bit messy, but for this topic. But I will recommend everyone interested to go to forum.makerdao.com. And there is a thread very, very organized with all the collaterals and
all these things.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, if I can say, if I spend some word adding collateral to MakerDAO, thanks to the implementation, strengthen the platform in a sense that there are more collateral where DAI can be generated.
Exactly.
And okay, so now I would like to ask to Alessio a few details about PyDAO, because PyDAO is basically simple in some terms, because basically merge the DAO and social contract concept with the allocation strategy, and they are using a very, very new platforms and product like, for example, Balancer. And my first question is, why did you choose Balancer, and why you choose as a first asset a BTC++ with that composition?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start from the BTC part. Like, I think the reasoning is, it's very simple to understand. There is obviously, well, there is pretty much a race to bridge like Bitcoin liquidity to DeFi, right? Like, we are all aware of it. We need like new source of liquidity coming into play to scale this industry. And there are a number of different projects working into that direction. That being said, each one of these projects has obviously different trade-off in terms of security models. And holding one single asset might be risk in isolation. Like, some of these assets are completely centralized, meaning that they are managed by admin keys. So you can imagine that if one of the admin keys of one of the centralized assets gets stolen or exploited for whatever reason, then that it's extremely dangerous. Now, the reasoning behind BTC++ is basically to give a weighted allocation between all the different, or all the relevant different representation of Bitcoin into the Ethereum network, so that if one of these blows up, like, then your part of the vast majority of your position is actually safe. it also gives the possibility to holders of stuff like WBTC, PBTC, IMBTC, SBTC to get some yield instead of having those assets sitting idly into their wallets. And that's part of the reason of why we eventually settled on Balancer, because at the very core of what Balancer is pretty much a multidimensional automated market making, right? Like it's a multidimensional IMM.
Yeah, this is hard to. So if you can explain to the normal.
Absolutely. So in regular exchanges, you have market makers that basically, to some degree, take the risk of making sure that the market is liquid enough for people to trade. At some point in DeFi, we've been seeing the concept of automated market makers. And the very well-known one is Uniswap. So Uniswap basically has a bonding curve, which makes sure that anyone can add liquidity to the protocol and people can trade against it. But the point about Uniswap is that until now, it's only each one of the pairs needs to be related to ETH. So like if you are creating a market into Uniswap, then you need to give enough amount of ETH and enough amount of whatever tokens you are creating the market with. Now, it's only related to two assets at a time. What Balancer introduces instead is multi-dimensional market making, which means like you can have a variety of different assets, up to 8 at this point, within the same pool. And in the case of BTC++, that gets configured into 4 different assets, as I was mentioning before: WBTC, SBTC, PBTC, and IMBTC. Now, because it's a Balancer pool act as a liquidity pool, it also means that people providing liquidity are actually getting paid by providing liquidity, similar to a way that Uniswap does by the swap fees.
Yeah.
So to some degree, like you might think about pies as a special mix between liquidity pools and index fund. Something I've been very fascinated about the team, which we've been working on for quite a while since before they came to mainnet, is they chose Uniswap to go for admin keys. So they have no way to control the protocol, and then that's up to the community to decide if this is good or bad. But definitely lowers the risk significantly in terms of admin keys in that regard, while giving this special feature.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to ask you why you choose an automated fund management instead of a traditional one, like could be Melon, for example, or Token Set. So what's the difference to have a continuous market making than have a discrete ones, and which are the risk related?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I want to start by saying that I think other platforms such as Melonport are a great platform, and I think the use case that really Melonport is very suitable for is actively managed funds, right? So actively managed funds are a very interesting concept, but they are highly coupled with the skills of the fund manager. The index approach instead is somewhat agnostic in that regard. Right, and then we know that statistically speaking, 92% of the active managed funds are underperforming index funds. So that's why we kind of wanted to go into the index side of things more. That being said, there is also the fact that Melonport, for instance, at the time of speaking, their funds are not tokenized, right? Which wouldn't really work in our use case. We had Mona presenting Melonport like a couple of times in our community calls, which you're all invited to join anytime in order to compare stuff. But that wasn't exactly like our use case. Now, in that regard, automated market making enables to be a more economically efficient rebalancing mechanism, which happens continuously, right? And that's important for that to happen because rebalancing portfolios, it's basically a way to get a premium from the volatility of the assets which are in there. And if it happens continuously, you don't have to rely on single people actually triggering the trades, which is nice. Compared to other platforms, like there is also Token Set around there, which is another very interesting platform, but like they choose Dutch auctions, which are a bit slower compared to, in comparison to IMM.
Yeah. I mean, every platform. I mean, from my understanding, the overall stuff is that you don't have transient using an automated market making, because the rebalancing happens continuously, basically.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, this is the most interesting stuff. So from a risk
It also means you
perspective,
get fees.
yeah, from a risk perspective, if in Melon you need to wait for a bot or for a single person to rebalance the index or the fund, for tokens that you have to wait for threshold or whatever, that could be okay for protecting you from high volatility, bad behavior, but at the same time doesn't give you an opportunity to react to fast events like we are used in the blockchain. So I think that we can go ahead with the last topic of this beautiful panel, that is basically the trends that we are going to see in the DeFi in the next months. And I would like to ask to Alessio, because basically PyDAO is based on the most newest platform. So what do you think we will see in the near future, also in your PyDAO?
Yeah, sure. So generally speaking, I think we are gonna see in the next phase of DeFi a consolidation of the offering of DeFi in terms of what can be given as a value proposition to the user, and that will happen mostly through, in my opinion, 3 different forms. One of that being insurance, the second one being a variety of different derivatives, and particularly synthetic assets. That's something I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. And lastly, I think another major trend, and I'm obviously biased about it, will be pretty much tokenized diversified portfolio. And I'm going to explain why I think it eventually all comes together into a diversified tokenized portfolio, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So, well, from my perspective, I'd say that I subscribe to the vision that the future of investing is going to be passive and permissionless, and that's really like the starting point how I think about PyDAO. In terms of the trends that I was mentioning before, we have been seeing some evolution of insurance, like happening a little bit in 2019, like in the last 6 months, and that's fantastic, right? Because like we now get to a point where we really understand that DeFi is extremely experimental just yet, right? Things are difficult, like it's a very difficult industry to work with, and it's very young. So you might have seen project like Nexus Mutual, which offers coverage against smart contract fraud. And I believe it's like a huge step forward for the entire industry. So now, for instance, you can end up into a situation where if you're using DAI, but you are not quite sure that the maker platform is going to be solid 100% of the time, you can, for instance, have a Pi, which includes DAI and some insurance into it, right? So you can somewhat mitigate the risk by holding a single token that holds both sides. But insurance in the Nexus Mutual way is not the only one that we have been seeing, right? There are a number of different things, like you might have seen Opin, for instance, or EDGIC, which are option protocols, which are extremely interesting to me, because the way they work, for the end user, eventually they end up providing a solution for people to protect, for instance, DeFi deposits into lending platform.
Yeah.
Being that the case of Compound, and I think they support something else as well, or to hedge about the risk of the price action of ETH as well. EDGIC is slightly more complicated than that, but it's also more flexible to some degree. But that also means that now we have a spectrum of different solutions to really protect ourselves. So you can think of a way where you have a Pi which is giving you Bitcoin exposure, like an ETH exposure, but you also have the necessary token to ensure to some degree against the price action or like major swings in that direction. Yeah. Now you take all these fantastic things and then you add to the mix synthetic tokens, right? Or synthetic assets. And I think I've been very fond of synthetic assets, just generally. Matteo knows this, I see laughing because we have been talking about that a lot. I think synthetic assets are going to be great for a variety of different reasons. I want to mention, well, two major projects, in my opinion, working towards that direction. One is, of course, synthetics, which I've been extremely fond of, and then they've been, to some degree, pioneering this idea, and now introducing even like more assets into the play. But in synthetics right now, users cannot create their own synthetic asset. And then and now he enters like this space, the UMA protocol, which you guys might have heard of, and like shout out to them. Like we have been in touch with them for a very long time and working together. Like they are partnering with PyDAO. And what happens with UMA is that suddenly anybody through the token builder can create their own synthetic assets, right? So from one day to another, you might see, exposure to traditional asset in finance, such as, stocks and bond and commodities, and a variety of different things.
Yeah.
Now, why is that great? That is great because if there is one lesson that almost every fund manager is gonna tell you, is that the most important thing you can do is to diversify your portfolio, right? There is like the only free lunch in finance is diversification, right? Now, the exposure to those different assets will eventually enable crypto investors to really spread their own assets into allocations which have a little bit of everything, right? And in the context of PyDAO, this will basically happen by composing different pies.
Yeah.
So you can imagine like you have the BTC++ pie and the traditional exposure pie, commodities pies, and they all come together like into a single pie. And this, I think it's important not only from a risk perspective, but because it's also a no-brainer for the users, right? Like it will eventually give a buy and hold strategy to end users that don't know how to, roll out their own future.
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
They don't know how to do their own options. Like they just don't know how to do that. Like they know they have to invest, but they don't know exactly how. Which I think it's very interesting, and I think it's also good for DeFi in many ways, because having as Maria, like connecting to what Maria said before, right? Having a broad, diversified source of collateral to some degree, like having a single token, which gives you broad diversification, which also means it will have lower volatility, and lower volatility means you have a more stable source of collateral.
Yeah.
A more stable source of collateral means you can scale DeFi because you need lower collateralization ratios.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. And okay, this is a very interesting vision of what we are going to expect in your opinion. I sincerely, I'm looking for seeing that UMA provide a more, a liquidation mechanism more stable and more solid. But just for concluding the panel, I would like to ask few cents to Maria and Matteo regarding their belief about the trends of the next month. So just few words. So what do you think, Maria, for example, that we are going to see in this year?
So I really hope to see the DAI peg restored in the next few weeks. No, I mean I really believe that in general DeFi will be the future. So I would like to now to get my community and marketing clothes on, because I'm not a technical, I don't have any technical background. So as far as concern adoption, I would like to tell that it's really important for everyone, for every project operating in DeFi, to make it very simple, understandable, accessible, and solid. So from the solidity, I mean the strength perspective, it's a technical thing, and I agree with everything Matteo and Alessio said.
Okay.
From my perspective, so the communication is very important, and the UX is very important, and it's fundamental. Like internet, like Web 2.0 adoption, the same should happen here. So I hope. I see a lot of improvements in this sense everywhere in a lot of projects and in the communities. For example, DeFi Italia was born recently, and before in Italy, probably nobody knew about DeFi, and now the community is, I think, 1K people. I don't know. So I'm happy about it, and I hope and I believe that in the next year the volume of USD locked there in DeFi will double or
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Maria. I agree with you that UX plus education is the one of the key of success for the adoption of the DeFi. So, Matteo, you are the last for today. So, what do you think that will happen in the near future?
Well, I actually agree with what Alessio said for the trends. I really consider insurance as one of the main topic for at least 2020. And so there are different ways to have an insurance in DeFi now. There is Nexus Mutual, as Alessio said, which is a mutual. There is Open on Edging that are more like options, so it's like more edging risk on lending protocols, for example. And so, yeah, I believe as well that this is one of the main topic for 2020. I think that, as you said, UX is really important. User experience is really important. So for products that wants to implement an insurance service like PayDAO, like Eidoo, it's really important to ship it, to give it to users in the most simple way. So for example, to have a actual built-in insurance, because for example, right now we have a Nexus Mutual pool as an insurance, but if a users want to have an insurance on Eidoo, they have to go to Nexus Mutual platform and create the insurance there. And in a user experience perspective, this is actually really bad. Every time you let users go outside your platform, they have to learn a totally different platform. So on a UX perspective, is really bad. So I think that insurance service is a trend for 2020, and built-in insurance service are even better. Other trends, well, synthetic assets are definitely something really cool that can happen in DeFi, even though there are a lot of things to fix and build before having reliable synthetics, I guess. And I see AMM, automatic market makers, as the main topic, along with the insurance service for 2020. So Curve, Balancer, Shell Protocol, Uniswap V2, they are all And last trend that I can see for 2020 is more competitive fiat on ramps. So there are different players in fiat on and off ramps. This means lower fees because there is a competition, and a better service for users. So I can see also that kind of trend for the next few years.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matteo. I agree with you that this for sure will be, to be honest, the first year for the adoption. Maybe not this year DeFi will go mainstream, but for sure, thanks to the consolidation and new protocols, but also with a big investment in UX and education, I think that we could see some sort of start for the mainstream adoption. We have completed. I mean, we are done. I would like to thank you, Maria, Matteo, and Alessio, and obviously also to Matteo Tambussi to let us to be here. And I would like to ask him if he has some question.
Yes, I mean, thank you first, Emiliano, for moderating so that I could grab a bite, have a coffee, smoke a cigarette. Thank you for being here. I would ask if any one of you is available in the next 2 hours for. I just realized that it was a very deep dive in DeFi talk, and I think that it would be good to have some of you attending the next panel because it's all about governance, government reception. So this is a hot topic also in DeFi. We talked about it with Simone earlier on about constraints in DeFi and legal frameworks, etc. I think that the next panel is going to be quite hot because we have Legal Hackers Torino represented by 2 lawyers involved in 2 legal hackers who are very active in the crypto community. We have a representative of governmental agencies from Poland and Germany who will basically showcase some of the use cases that have been featuring the scope. So I would like, nothing. I have no question. I would just ask you to just, take a break, but keep it on. Keep the channel on, and if something pings you, just come and blah 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 blah. Question everything. Never settle for nothing.
Thank you very much, Matteo. I would like to check if I'm able to be here. I have a call in few minutes, but as soon as I will finish, I will join again.
Perfect. Thank you, Emiliano.